Welcome to the old sports club, my friend.
The 1904 Olympic Games in St. Louis, Missouri were already unusual. They were held in conjunction with the World's Fair, stretching over several months and often overshadowed by the surrounding festivities. But nothing compared to the spectacle of the marathon, an event that became legendary not for athletic glory, but for confusion, controversy, and near disaster. On August 30th, 1904, temperatures hovered in the 90s and the humidity was stifling. Worse, the race was run on dusty, unpaved roads, shared with cars and horses. Only one water station was placed along the entire route, a deliberate decision by the organizers who wanted to experiment with, quote, purposeful dehydration, believing it would test the limits of human endurance. 32 runners lined up at the start, representing the U.S., South Africa, Cuba, and a few other countries. Among them was Fred Lors, an American bricklayer who had trained in his spare time, and Thomas Hicks, a more experienced runner with a serious demeanor. Also present were two runners from South Africa who were barefoot, and a Cuban named Felix Carvajal, who had arrived in the U.S. by raising money through street performances. Carvajal became an early fan favorite, barely over 5 feet tall and dressed in a long-sleeved shirt, pants, and street shoes. He cut his pants into shorts with a pocket knife just before the start. During the race, he stopped to chat with spectators and even picked fruit from an orchard, which caused him stomach cramps later on. Dust quickly became the runner's biggest enemy. Cars carrying race officials kicked up thick clouds, coating lungs and blinding eyes. The lead runner, Fred Lors, looked strong early, until he collapsed after 9 miles from heat exhaustion. His trainers placed him in a car, which drove him the next 11 miles. Near the stadium, Lors recovered and, for reasons still debated, jogged the last stretch and crossed the finish line first, greeted by applause, and even prepared to accept the winner's wreath, until someone informed officials that he had cheated. Lors smiled and claimed it was a joke. Officials were not amused. He was disqualified immediately. That left Thomas Hicks as the new leader, but Hicks was in bad shape. His trainers, lacking modern sports medicine, attempted to revive him with a mixture of brandy and strychnine, a common rat poison, which, in small doses, was used at the time as a stimulant. Hicks stumbled forward, barely able to keep his legs moving. He hallucinated. At one point, he begged to lie down. His trainers refused, essentially dragging him along. Meanwhile, Carvajal had recovered from his fruit incident and was making up ground, smiling and waving to the crowd as he passed other runners. The South Africans, unfamiliar with the course, were reportedly chased off track by wild dogs, which added another bizarre twist. After over 3 hours, Hicks finally reached the stadium, yellowed with dust, dehydrated, and barely conscious. He was carried over the finish line by his handlers. Despite receiving external assistance, he was declared the official winner, largely because no rules existed to disqualify such behavior at the time. Of the 32 starters, only 14 finished. The race drew criticism even then for its poor planning and lack of concern for athlete safety. One runner nearly died. Hicks, the winner, lost 8 pounds during the race, and later, he would never run another marathon. Despite the controversy, the marathon left a lasting impression. It showed the dangers of pushing human limits without medical oversight and led to reforms in how marathons were organized, including clearer rules and better attention to hydration. More than a century later, the 1904 Olympic Marathon remains one of the most bizarre, chaotic, and oddly compelling events in sports history. A race where the winner was nearly poisoned. The first finisher took a car ride, and wild dogs played a role in the final standings.
She's a long, tall, yellow gal. Hey, hey.
On the evening of October 8, 1995, the Seattle Mariners and New York Yankees met at the Kingdome for Game 5 of the American League Division Series. The stakes were monumental. not only for the series, but for the future of baseball in Seattle. The Mariners had only been in existence since 1977 and had never made the playoffs until this very season. Throughout the 1980s and early 90s, the team had struggled with poor attendance and rumors of relocation. But 1995, shortened by the players' strike the year before, brought unexpected hope. Under manager Lou Piniella and powered by stars like Ken Griffey Jr., Edgar Martinez, Randy Johnson, and a young Alex Rodriguez, Seattle stormed through the second half of the season to clinch the AL West in a tiebreaker game against the California Angels. Now, they were one win away from the ALCS, and the only thing in their way was the New York Yankees. Game 5 began with Mariners ace Randy Johnson unavailable to start due to pitching Game 3, so Andy Benez took the mound. Opposing him was veteran right-hander David Cone, who brought postseason experience and grit. The game quickly became a back-and-forth battle. The Yankees struck first. In the second inning, Don Mattingly doubled and later scored, giving New York an early 1-0 lead. The Mariners responded in the bottom half with a 2-run homer from Luis Sojo, a light-hitting infielder who delivered in a big moment. Seattle led 2-1. New York answered again. Paul O'Neill and Ruben Sierra chipped in with hits. Mattingly, playing in what would be the final game of his career, singled in a run. The game was tied 2-2. The tension only grew as both teams traded leads through the middle innings. By the 6th, the Yankees were up 4-2. Cone was still on the mound, gritty as ever, working deep into his pitch count. The Mariners needed a spark, and they got one in the 8th inning. Ken Griffey Jr., already with 4 home runs in the series, led off with a single. Edgar Martinez came to the plate and delivered a clutch double into the gap, scoring Griffey and cutting the deficit to 4-3. The crowd at the Kingdome of over 57,000 was deafening. Cone, now over 140 pitches deep, stayed in to face Doug Strange with the bases loaded. He walked Strange, tying the game 4-4, and finally exited the game to a mix of admiration and exhaustion. The game moved to extra innings. In the top of the 11th, the Yankees scratched out a run off Randy Johnson, who had entered in relief, a rare role for the Cy Young winner. New York led 5-4 and needed just 3 outs to win the series, but the bottom of the 11th would become the stuff of legend. Joey Cora led off with a drag bunt single. Griffey followed with another single. With 2 on and none out, Edgar Martinez stepped up to the plate. On the second pitch from Jack McDowell, Edgar lashed a line drive into the left field corner. Cora scored easily to tie the game. Griffey, known more for his power than his speed, tore around the bases. As the throw came in from left field, Griffey dove across home plate, safe. Final score, Mariners 6, Yankees 5. The Kingdome exploded in joy. Griffey lay on the ground, arms outstretched, mobbed by teammates. The image of his beaming face at the bottom of the dog pile became one of the most iconic photos in Mariners history. That double, forever known as the double, is widely credited with energizing the city of Seattle. In the months that followed, public momentum helped secure funding for a new ballpark, eventually leading to the construction of Safeco Field, now T-Mobile Park. Baseball stayed in Seattle, and for Don Mattingly, it was the final game of a storied career, never reaching the World Series. But for Seattle, Game 5 of the 1995 ALDS wasn't just a win. It was the turning point, the night the Mariners truly arrived. Fast forward 6 years later, Lou Piniella and his Mariners would post a 116-46 record, tied for the best of all time. By the fall of 2000, Dale Earnhardt was already a NASCAR legend. The Intimidator, with his black number 3 Chevrolet and unmistakable aggressive driving style. He had won 7 Winston Cup championships, tying the all-time record. But it had been a while since he'd been to victory lane. At 49 years old, Earnhardt was nearing the twilight of his career, still competitive, still respected, but no longer the week in, week out dominator he once was. That changed on October 15, 2000, at Talladega Superspeedway, a track where Earnhardt had always been a master. He had already won there 9 times and was known for his ability to navigate the chaotic, high-speed chess match of superspeedway racing better than anyone. The race that day, the Winston 500, started like many others at Talladega, fast, unpredictable, and full of lead changes. With its 2.66-mile tri-oval and steep banking, Talladega invites drafting packs and wild finishes, and this race would deliver one of the wildest. From the drop of the green flag, the race was a constant shuffle. Drivers moved in and out of the draft, swapping positions lap after lap. Earnhardt started 18th, mid-pack, and for much of the race, he hovered outside the top 10. His car wasn't the fastest on its own, but it handled well in traffic, and that was all Earnhardt needed. The final laps turned chaotic. With less than 20 laps to go, a multi-car crash brought out a caution, setting up a restart that would define the race. As the field bunched up again, Jeff Gordon, Dale Jarrett, Tony Stewart, and Bobby Labonte battled up front. Earnhardt was stuck in 18th place with just 17 laps remaining. What happened next was the stuff of legend. As the green flag waved, Earnhardt began weaving through the field, using the draft masterfully. He tucked behind cars, moved high, dove low, working both lines like a magician. Lap after lap, he picked off competitors with uncanny precision. He made bold moves, threading his car through tight gaps with complete confidence. The crowd at Talladega, always fond of Earnhardt, was on its feet. As the number 3 rocketed toward the front, the noise in the grandstands grew louder with every pass. With help from Kenny Wallace and Joe Nemechek, who lined up behind him in the draft, Earnhardt surged forward. In the final laps, he charged into the top 5. Then, with just over 1 lap to go, he took the lead, slicing through traffic, claiming the front as if he had been there all day. Wallace and Nemechek stayed behind him, and Earnhardt held off the pack to take the checkered flag. From 18th to 1st in just 5 laps. It was one of the most dramatic comebacks in NASCAR history. In victory lane, Earnhardt was jubilant. "We just kept working, kept digging, and the car was awesome," he said, grinning behind his sunglasses. "Man, they can't say nothing now about this old man." The win was Earnhardt's 76th career Cup Series victory, and though no one knew it at the time, it would be his last. Less than 4 months later, on February 18, 2001, Earnhardt died in a last lap crash during the Daytona 500, leaving the racing world in shock. That final win at Talladega has since taken on deeper meaning. It was a perfect representation of what made Earnhardt great: skill, boldness, and a deep understanding of the race around him. It wasn't just speed, it was instinct, honed over 2 decades of competition. Today, this race is remembered not just as a thrilling victory, but as a fitting final chapter in the career of a legend. A last reminder of Dale Earnhardt's greatness, delivered on a track where he ruled like no other. On November 17, 1968, the New York Jets faced the Oakland Raiders in a game that would not only become a classic for its wild finish, but also transform the way football was broadcast on television. What happened that day became known simply as the Heidi game, a moment when a movie about a Swiss orphan overshadowed one of the most dramatic endings in NFL history. The matchup was already compelling. The Jets, led by their brash young quarterback, Joe Namath, were 7-2 and vying for supremacy in the AFL East. The Raiders, quarterbacked by Darryl LaMonica, were 7-2 as well, leading the AFL West. Both teams had high-powered offenses and physical defenses. This wasn't just a game, it was a possible preview of the AFL Championship. The game, broadcast nationally on NBC, was scheduled to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and by network policy was allotted a 3-hour window. At 7 p.m. sharp, NBC had a previously scheduled program to air. a made-for-TV movie adaptation of the children's classic Heidi, starring Jennifer Edwards and Sir Michael Redgrave. Heidi was heavily promoted, especially to families with children. NBC's executives had promised that, no matter what happened with the football game, Heidi would begin at 7 p.m. sharp. The football game itself was intense and tightly contested. The Jets took an early lead, with Namath throwing touchdown passes to Don Maynard and George Sauer. The Raiders responded with LaMonica airing it out to his deep threats. By the fourth quarter, the Jets were ahead 32-29 in a game marked by lead changes, big plays, and brutal hits. But time was running out, both in the game and in NBC's broadcast window. As 7 p.m. approached, executives at NBC headquarters in New York were in disarray. The game was running along due to penalties and incomplete passes. Viewers across the country were glued to their TVs, especially with the score still tight. In the control room, a debate erupted. Should we stick with the game or switch to Heidi as scheduled? Desperate phone calls flew between NBC Sports network executives and affiliate stations. At one point, NBC Sports head Don Scotty Connell tried to overrule the switch, but due to an overload of calls from angry viewers and the jamming of NBC's switchboards, the message never got through in time. At exactly 7 p.m., with 1 minute, 5 seconds left in the game, NBC cut away from the broadcast. Without warning, viewers across the country were suddenly watching a young girl in the Swiss Alps, just as the Raiders were about to receive a kickoff. What the national audience missed was one of the most incredible finishes in AFL and NFL history. After the Jets kicked a field goal to go up by 3, the Raiders got the ball back. On the very last play, LaMonica hit Charlie Smith for a 46-yard touchdown, putting Oakland up 36-32. Then, on the ensuing kickoff, the Jets fumbled, and Preston Riddlehuber scooped it up and ran it in for another Raiders touchdown. In just 9 seconds, the Raiders had scored 2 touchdowns, turning a 3-point deficit into an 11-point win. Final score, 43-32. But outside the stadium, millions of viewers never saw it. Furious fans flooded NBC with phone calls, crashing their phone system. Football fans were outraged at missing this dramatic conclusion. The fallout was immediate and lasting. NBC apologized, admitting the mistake. The incident was so notorious that it led to a major change in how sports were broadcast. From then on, networks were required to show live sporting events to their conclusion, regardless of the scheduled programming. The Heidi game didn't just make headlines, it changed the business of sports television forever. It was a flashpoint where the popularity of football collided with the constraints of network TV, and football won. Based on the backlash, the NFL inserted a clause into its TV contract stating that the whole damn game had to be shown in its home market no matter what. Today, the Heidi game is a reminder of how one decision to cut away from a live event can become a pivotal moment in history. And all because a little girl in the Alps interrupted one of the wildest finishes the NFL had ever seen. In the summer of 1957, the U.S. Women's Open arrived at Winged Foot Golf Club in Mamaroneck, New York, a course known for its demanding layout, fast greens, and narrow fairways. The championship was already gaining stature, but what unfolded that year would become one of the most heartbreaking and talked about events in U.S. golf history. A moment when a simple procedural error overshadowed the skill and grit of a deserving player. Among the field was Jackie Pung, a respected 36-year-old golfer from Hawaii. Known for her elegant swing and steady nerves, she had come close to major victories before. This tournament seemed to be her moment. Through 4 tough rounds, she stayed consistent and poised, culminating in a strong final round 72. Her total score of 298 put her 1 stroke ahead of the nearest competitor, Betsy Rawls, a formidable opponent in her own right. As Pung walked off the 18th green, she was greeted with applause. The crowd believed they had witnessed a worthy champion. But minutes later, that moment of triumph unraveled. The issue stemmed from a basic but strictly enforced rule governed by the United States Golf Association, Rule 66D, in the modern rulebook now updated as Rule 3.3b3, which requires players to ensure the accuracy of each hole's score on their card. If a player signs for a score lower than what was actually made on a hole, disqualification is automatic. There is no recourse. The intention is to protect the integrity of the game by placing the responsibility on the players, who act as their own referees. In Peng's case, the error occurred on the fourth hole, where she had made a 5. Her playing partner, Betty Jamieson, who was keeping her card, mistakenly wrote down a 4. Neither woman caught the error when reviewing and signing the card, a common task after a long, focused round under pressure. After the scores were posted and preliminary congratulations offered, tournament officials noticed the discrepancy. With no choice under the rules, they informed Peng of the outcome. She was disqualified. The shock was immediate and painful. Spectators who had gathered to watch her receive the trophy fell silent. The heartbreak in the clubhouse was palpable. Peng, for her part, accepted the news with remarkable dignity. "It's the rule, and I must abide by it," she said quietly, holding back emotion. Her sportsmanship became as memorable as the disqualification itself. The title was instead awarded to Betsy Rawls, who finished at 299. Though officially the champion, Rawls expressed little joy in the win, acknowledging Peng's superior play. "Jackie deserved it," she said. "She played better than I did." The USGA's stance was firm. They emphasized the importance of consistent and fair application of the rules. The rule was in place not just to penalize dishonesty, but to enforce a shared standard of precision in a game where every stroke and every written number counts. Even honest mistakes had to carry consequences, or the sport's integrity would be compromised. Yet, many observers questioned whether the penalty was too harsh. After all, Peng's actual score had not been disputed, only the recording of it. The mistake was clerical, not deceptive. But under USGA rules at the time, intent did not matter. A lower score on a signed card meant automatic disqualification. Moved by her grace and misfortune, fans passed a hat around the gallery, collecting over $3,000 for Peng, more than the official winner's share. It was a powerful gesture of sympathy and respect for the player they felt was the true champion. Though Peng would never win a U.S. Women's Open, she remains immortalized by this story. The 1957 tournament became a pivotal lesson in golf's unyielding structure of rules and how a single number, a 4 instead of a 5, could eclipse 4 days of brilliance. In golf, every shot counts, and so does every digit on the scorecard.
Why did you leave me behind? I don't
The National Basketball Association, NBA, now a global spectacle, owes part of its richness to the international talent that has shaped the game over decades. While today's league is full of European stars like Luka, Giannis, and Jokic, the story of European players in the NBA starts much earlier, with a lesser-known figure named Hank Biasati, the first European-born player to appear in an NBA game. Henry Hank Biasati was born on January 14, 1922, in Biano, Italy. His family immigrated to Canada during his childhood, where he grew up in Windsor, Ontario. Though Biasati became a Canadian citizen and primarily identified with his Canadian upbringing, his birthplace technically makes him the first European-born player to appear in what would become the NBA. Biasati was a multi-sport athlete, excelling in both basketball and baseball. After serving in the Royal Canadian Air Force during World War II, he returned to athletic competition and made his mark in both sports. In baseball, he even had a brief stint with the Philadelphia Athletics in MLB. But in basketball, his name is cemented in history for his role in the 1946-47 season, playing for the Toronto Huskies in the inaugural season of the Basketball Association of America, the league that would later merge with the NBL to become the modern NBA. Biasati only played 6 games for the Huskies before focusing on baseball full-time, and his basketball career in the league was short-lived. Nonetheless, his appearance marked the beginning of European participation in the NBA. even if the league and the player himself didn't recognize the broader implications at the time. For decades after Biasotti, European players remained a rarity in the NBA. Basketball was still largely a North American game, and the infrastructure in Europe wasn't yet designed to produce athletes who could thrive in the American professional system. Occasionally, players from Europe would enter the league, often viewed as curiosities more than stars, but they were few and far between. That changed in the late 80s, early 90s, with the arrival of players like Dražen Petrovic, Vlade Divac, and Detlef Schrempf, among others. These players began to break down the stereotypes that European players were soft and unathletic. Petrovic, in particular, with his fiery competitiveness and sharpshooting for the New Jersey Nets, became a symbol of what European players could bring to the league. The international revolution accelerated in the 2000s, led by stars like Dirk Nowitzki, Tony Parker, Pau Gasol, and Manu Ginobili. Nowitzki, from Germany, became the first European to win NBA MVP in 2007 and Finals MVP in 2011, cementing his legacy as one of the greatest power forwards in league history. In recent years, the influence has only deepened. Giannis Antetokounmpo, a Nigerian Greek forward, won back-to-back MVPs in 2019 and 2020 and led the Milwaukee Bucks to an NBA title in 2021. Nikola Jokic, a Serbian center with an unorthodox yet brilliant style, won MVP in 21, 22, and 24, and anchored the Denver Nuggets to their first championship in 23. Meanwhile, Luka Doncic, a Slovenian prodigy, is redefining what a point forward can be. These players are not merely contributors. They are faces of the league, demonstrating how global the NBA has become. Today, nearly 25% of NBA players are born outside the US, many from Europe. They bring with them different styles of play, tactical discipline, team-first approaches, and unique skill sets honed in European leagues. While Hank Biasotti may not have been a star, his brief appearance in 1946 opened the door, however slightly, for a future that few could have imagined. From the small town of Biano to the global stage of the NBA, Biasotti's story marks the beginning of a profound transformation, one that has helped make basketball a truly global game. Baseball has certainly seen its share of remarkable moments. Walk-off home runs, perfect games, heroic comebacks. But one of the strangest, most unbelievable events in Major League Baseball history took place on August 24, 1919, when Cleveland Indians pitcher Ray Caldwell was literally struck by lightning, and he still finished the game. Ray Caldwell was no ordinary ball player. Born in 1888 in Corydon, Pennsylvania, he debuted with the New York Highlanders, later to be known as the Yankees, in 1910. A tall right-hander, Caldwell had excellent natural talent, a sharp fastball, a deceptive curve, and a calm mound presence. But his career was hampered by inconsistency and off-the-field struggles, including issues with alcohol and reliability. After a turbulent stint in New York and later with the Boston Red Sox, Caldwell's career seemed to be winding down, but in mid-1919, he was given one more chance, this time with the Cleveland Indians, who were then trying to climb their way into contention. The team's manager, Tris Speaker, saw potential in the now 31-year-old Caldwell and signed him partway through the season. In his very first start for Cleveland, Caldwell turned in a gritty, unforgettable performance for reasons no one could have predicted. The game was played at League Park in Cleveland against the Philadelphia Athletics. As the game wore on, dark clouds gathered overhead. By the ninth inning, Caldwell had pitched a strong game and was protecting a 2-1 lead. With 2 outs in the top of the ninth, he was just 1 out away from a complete game victory. That's when nature intervened. As Caldwell began his windup, a bolt of lightning cracked through the sky and struck the mound. Eyewitnesses say there was a blinding flash, followed by an explosive sound that echoed throughout the ballpark. Caldwell collapsed instantly, his body thrown to the ground by the force of the strike. For a few terrifying moments, everyone assumed the worst. Teammates and coaches rushed to the mound, expecting to find Caldwell seriously injured, or worse. According to some reports, he was briefly unconscious and lay flat on the ground as rain started to fall. The bolt had struck either near him or directly on him. Accounts vary, but one thing is agreed upon: it was a direct encounter with lightning. Amazingly, after a few moments, Caldwell began to stir, shaken and singed but alive. Even more astonishing, once he had recovered enough to stand, Caldwell waved off the trainers, returned to the mound, and got the final out to complete the game. He finished the win over the Athletics, having pitched all 9 innings, with a bolt from the heavens in the middle. Caldwell's story became instant baseball folklore. The press marveled at his toughness, and the incident gave his reputation a strange new edge, not just as a talented pitcher, but as a man who could literally take a lightning strike and keep going. It also seemed to spark, no pun intended, a brief career revival. Caldwell pitched well for Cleveland the rest of the season and even threw a no-hitter against his former team, the Yankees, on September 10th, just over 2 weeks later. Though his career would fade again in the early 20s, the legend of August 24th, 1919 never left him. Over the years, the story grew in the retelling, but the central facts remained. Ray Caldwell was struck by lightning on a major league mound and finished the game. The incident remains one of the most unusual in baseball history. A moment when the unpredictable forces of nature cross paths with a gritty athlete who refused to step aside. Caldwell may not be in the Hall of Fame, but his name endures thanks to one of the most unforgettable finishes the game has ever seen. In the long and storied annals of baseball, where statistics often tell the story, sometimes it's the wild, almost mythic moments, like a lightning strike on the pitcher's mound, that resonate the loudest. Not even Zeus could help the A's win that day. Jim Thorpe's name evokes images of Olympic glory, football dominance, and baseball perseverance. Hailed as one of the greatest all-around athletes in history, Thorpe's legacy includes gold medals in the pentathlon and decathlon at the 1912 Stockholm Olympics, a pioneering role in early professional football, and a 6-year career in Major League Baseball. But tucked away in the corners of history is a lesser-known chapter: his time as a professional basketball player. In the early 1920s, long before the NBA existed, and decades before basketball became a mainstream professional sport, Jim Thorpe quietly joined the ranks of the traveling pro basketball world. This was a time when the sport was still evolving, with various independent leagues, barnstorming teams, and regional circuits offering opportunities for skilled athletes to compete, often for modest pay and long, grueling road trips. After his Olympic triumph in 1912 and subsequent stripping of his medals due to amateurism rules, which he had played minor league baseball for pay before the Olympics, Thorpe found opportunities in professional baseball and football. But after his Major League Baseball career wound down in 1919, and while he was still involved in pro football, which he was the first president of what would become the NFL in 1920, Thorpe turned to yet another sport: basketball. In 1926, Thorpe joined a barnstorming team known as the world-famous Indians, a traveling basketball team composed entirely of Native American players, with Thorpe as its main attraction. The team crisscrossed the country, playing games in high school gyms, civic centers, and small-town arenas. While the team's exact win-loss records are hard to trace, records from that era are patchy at best, what's certain is that they played an incredible number of games, often multiple contests in a week, across dozens of states. These tours weren't just about basketball. For fans in small towns across America, seeing Jim Thorpe in person, the Olympic hero, football legend, and baseball player, was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Thorpe's fame gave the team an instant draw, and his heritage as a Sac and Fox Native American added symbolic importance to the all-indigenous squad, especially at a time when Native representation in American sports and public life was extremely limited. On the court, Thorpe played forward, though in his late 30s by the time he joined the world-famous Indians, he remained a strong, agile athlete. Contemporary accounts praise his ability to rebound, his physical style of play, and his court awareness, a reflection of his natural athleticism. When it comes to sports, you can't bet against Jim Thorpe. He was also known for his leadership and presence. Just having him on the floor elevated the intensity of the contests and often intimidated opponents. The style of play in the 1920s was a lot different than today. The game was slower, more physical, and focused on ball control. Yet, Thorpe adapted with ease. He may not have been a polished basketball technician, but he brought grit, power, and an uncanny knack for positioning. The world-famous Indians disbanded in the early 1930s, but for a span of about 5 years, Thorpe lived on the road with the team, traveling thousands of miles by train and car, playing in packed and modest venues alike. For Thorpe, basketball wasn't just another paycheck. It was another arena in which he could demonstrate his extraordinary versatility. This chapter of his life never received the attention that his Olympic or football feats did. For years, it remained mostly an anecdote in biographies or tucked into footnotes of sports history books. But it's an important reminder of just how multifaceted Thorpe's athletic career really was. His foray into professional basketball not only adds another layer to his legacy, but also speaks to the life of athletes in the early 20th century. Unlike today's stars, who often find financial security in one sport, Thorpe moved between multiple games to earn a living and sustain his love for competition, and in each, he excelled. Though largely forgotten, Jim Thorpe's basketball career exemplifies what made him such a remarkable figure, a relentless competitor, a symbol of perseverance, and a man who could seemingly do it all. In the annals of NFL history, certain performances stand out, not because they were expected, but because they came from unexpected places. One of the most surprising and memorable came on January 1st, 2012, when Matt Flynn, a backup quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, rang in the new year by delivering one of the most prolific passing games the league had ever seen. It was a day that redefined his career, if only briefly, and etched his name in Packers lore. Matt Flynn entered the NFL as a 7th-round draft pick in 2008, coming off a successful college career at LSU, where he had led the Tigers to a BCS national championship in 2007. Though he was never considered a top prospect, his poise, leadership, and understanding of the game made him a solid backup option. In Green Bay, he found himself behind Aaron Rodgers, who had become the face of the franchise and one of the league's premier quarterbacks. As such, Flynn's opportunities were limited. He spent most of his early career holding a clipboard, absorbing the playbook, and preparing for moments that rarely came. That changed in Week 17 of the 2011 NFL season. The Packers had already clinched the NFC's number 1 seed with a 14-1 record. With nothing to play for in terms of playoff positioning, head coach Mike McCarthy chose to rest Rodgers and give Flynn the start against the Detroit Lions at Lambeau Field. It was a smart, low-risk decision, and few expected much fanfare. But what followed was one of the greatest statistical performances in NFL history. Flynn didn't just play well, he exploded. He completed 31 of 44 passes for 480 yards and 6 touchdowns, leading the Packers to a 45-41 shootout victory. Both the passing yards and touchdown total set single-game franchise records, eclipsing marks held by Rodgers and Brett Favre. The game was electric from start to finish. Detroit, needing a win to secure better playoff positioning, fielded its starters, including quarterback Matt Stafford, who also had a huge day with 520 passing yards. But Flynn consistently matched Stafford drive for drive, showing command of the offense and pinpoint accuracy. He connected with Jordy Nelson for 3 touchdowns and found Ryan Grant, Jermichael Finley, and Donald Driver for others. His performance was confident, composed, and at times dazzling. While Flynn had started a game before, most notably in 2010 in a near upset of the New England Patriots, nothing compared to this breakout. In one afternoon, he went from a reliable backup to the most coveted free agent quarterback of the offseason. With Rodgers entrenched as the starter in Green Bay, Flynn hit the market with a sky-high value, That offseason, Flynn signed a lucrative 3-year, $26 million contract with Seattle, a deal that reflected the belief that he could be a starting quarterback. However, that promise never materialized. He was quickly overtaken on the depth chart by rookie Russell Wilson, who would go on to become the face of the Seahawks franchise. Flynn's post-Green Bay career became a series of short stints in backup roles, with the Raiders, Bills, Packers again, and a few other teams. But he never again reached the heights of that magical afternoon in January 2012. Still, that performance remains an iconic footnote in NFL history. Flynn is one of just a handful of quarterbacks to throw for 6 touchdowns in a single game. His 480 passing yards also ranks among the most in Packers history. What made it even more memorable was the context. A backup quarterback with limited regular season reps delivering a record-setting game against a playoff-caliber opponent. In the end, Matt Flynn's career may not have lived up to the hopes that blossomed from that game, but for one cold January afternoon in Wisconsin, he was unstoppable. It was a performance born of preparation, opportunity, and execution, and a reminder that in the NFL, greatness can come from anywhere. In the long history of Major League Baseball, few positions have experienced more dramatic shifts in safety equipment than the catcher. Tasked with squatting behind the plate and facing fastballs, foul tips, and flying bats, catchers have always walked a tightrope between duty and danger. But in 1996, one moment redefined catcher safety forever, when Charlie O'Brien, a veteran backstop with the Toronto Blue Jays, became the first MLB player to wear a hockey-style catcher's mask in a professional game. O'Brien wasn't a superstar, but he was respected around the league for his defensive prowess and game-calling abilities. After years of enduring foul balls to the mask and repeated concussions, he began searching for a safer solution. Inspired by the protective gear used by NHL goalies, O'Brien worked with Van Velden Mask Inc., a Canadian company that specialized in goalie masks, to adapt the hockey-style helmet for the baseball diamond. The result was a full head helmet with a reinforced cage covering the face, a stark contrast to the traditional two-piece setup used by MLB catchers for decades, which is a wire mask over a soft cap. The new mask offered greater protection, improved vision, and more comfort, especially when taking foul tips directly to the face. It also had one major innovation. It didn't come loose or fall off during impact, reducing the risk of sudden exposure to injury. When O'Brien took the field wearing the new mask during a 1996 game, it turned heads. Some players and fans were skeptical. The look was foreign, and baseball is nothing if not a sport of tradition. But the logic was sound. The hockey-style mask offered full head and chin protection, stayed secure during collisions or tips, and reduced the impact shock of direct hits. It didn't take long for other catchers to notice. Initially, younger players in the minors began testing the design. Within a few years, catchers across all of baseball, especially those who had experienced concussions or facial injuries, started switching. By the early 2000s, the hockey-style mask had become a common sight, and today it is the dominant choice at all levels of the game. To understand the significance of O'Brien's innovation, it helps to step back and look at the evolution of catcher's gear as a whole. In the 19th century, catchers were barely protected at all. The first mask didn't appear until 1876, when Harvard student Fred Thayer designed a rudimentary wire cage mask to help his catchers stay behind the plate without fear. At first, it was ridiculed, but within years, it became standard. By the early 1900s, chest protectors and shin guards were introduced, often drawing controversy. When Roger Bresnahan, a Hall of Fame catcher for the New York Giants, first wore shin guards in 1907, borrowed from a cricket team, fans laughed, and some even booed. But the benefits quickly became clear. Chest protectors evolved from pillow-like pads to more streamlined, body contouring designs. Shin guards followed suit, becoming lighter, more flexible, and more anatomically shaped. Gloves grew in size and padding, helping catchers receive pitches with greater ease and less pain. But the mask remained largely unchanged for most of the 20th century, A steel cage over a soft skull cap. It was light and easy to remove, useful for tracking foul pop-ups, yet it left the top, sides, and back of the head vulnerable. As pitchers began throwing harder and batters swung with more force, foul tips became more violent, and the need for better protection became obvious. The hockey-style mask met that need. With advanced materials like polycarbonate shells, shock-absorbing padding, and contoured cages for better sightlines, it became the modern solution to an old problem. It offered catchers a blend of durability, safety, and comfort that the traditional mask couldn't match. Today, thanks in part to O'Brien's bold move, catchers are better protected than ever before. The hockey-style mask is now standard at nearly every level of organized baseball, and its invention marked one of the most significant advancements in catcher safety in the past century. In a sport steeped in tradition, innovation often comes slowly, but sometimes it takes one player willing to wear something strange to change the game for everyone.
Thanks for listening, friend, and for stopping by the Old Sports Club. If you're anything like us and love a good sports story, be sure to give us a follow, rating, and subscribe over on YouTube. We'd appreciate it.